Hey folks, welcome back. So glad you've joined us here at Walk God's Way for another daily devotional episode. This is your host, Tom Emmons, and you can find out more about me and about Walk God's Way at www.walkgodsway.com. Okay, so let's get started with today's devotional, which I've entitled Making Christ Holy in Your Heart. Our text will be 1 Peter 3:15. Now, I think most of us are fairly familiar with 1 Peter 3:15 and may have even memorized it. It says, "But set Christ apart as Lord in your hearts, and always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks about the hope that is in you." I imagine many of you were quoting that as I was reading it, right? Well, we often use this verse as a call for the need for Christian apologetics. And I think it's right to think of it that way. The word answer in this verse is a translation of the Greek word apologion, from which we derive the English word apologetics. What we don't often consider, though, is what it means to set Christ apart as Lord in our hearts. And we don't often hear much about the context within which we find this verse. Yet the context, I think, really draws out some incredible insights from this verse. So let's look at 1 Peter 3:15 in context. Let's start in verse 8 of 1 Peter 3. "Finally, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, affectionate, compassionate, and humble. Do not return evil for evil or insult for insult, but instead bless others, because you were called to inherit a blessing. For the one who wants to love life and see good days must keep his tongue from evil and his lips from uttering deceit, and he must turn away from evil and do good. He must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer, but the Lord's face is against those who do evil. For who is going to harm you if you are devoted to what is good? But in fact, if you happen to suffer because of righteousness, you are blessed. But do not be terrified of them or be shaken. But instead, set Christ apart as Lord in your hearts, and always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks about the hope you possess. Yet do it with courtesy and respect, keeping a good conscience, so that those who slander your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame when they accuse you. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if God wills it, than for doing evil." So what's the context here? The two admonitions to set Christ apart as Lord in your hearts and to always be ready to give an answer are set within the context of a discussion about experiencing suffering because of one's righteousness for doing what is right. The context is dealing with suffering. And Peter tells us that when we suffer because of our righteousness for doing what is right, we are in fact blessed. And rather than be terrified of those who cause our suffering, we are to set Christ apart as Lord in our hearts. And we are to be ready to give an answer for the hope that we possess. And when we do give an answer, when we do engage in apologetics with those who even wish us harm, we are to do so with courtesy and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that their slanderous accusations that we behaved wrongly will be proven baseless. What is it that we often do when we suffer, especially unjustly? What is our propensity, our tendency? Well, the two ways we often respond to suffering are to blame God and bash people. When suffering is harsh and unjust, we tend to lash out. We become irritable or angry or embittered or harshly defensive. We direct our frustration toward God or toward others, or both. Perhaps that's why Peter addresses our response both to God and to others in this context of suffering. Peter reminds us that during periods of suffering, we particularly need to pay attention to or make sure we have set Christ apart as Lord in our hearts. The phrase set apart is literally translated make holy. We need to be especially diligent to make Christ holy in our hearts during times when we suffer, because those are the times when we tend to get angry with God or feel despondent. Neither response is making Christ holy in our hearts as Lord. If you're suffering in any shape or form, Peter's admonition to you is to be extra diligent to make Christ holy, to set Christ apart in your heart as the Lord that he is. Our suffering should not, even if it's just within our hearts, lower the elevated status of Christ as Lord, as evidenced by disobedience to him. In other words, don't let your suffering sabotage your submission to Christ as Lord. Make Christ holy in your heart. And Peter also reminds us that when we are suffering, we need to pay special attention to how we respond to others, especially to those who are causing our suffering. Once we have set Christ apart as Lord in our hearts, we need to be ready to and able to give others an answer as to why we have this hope in Christ. But we are to be especially careful to do so with courtesy and with respect, because that's the last thing we want to do when we're suffering. With all that we are and all that we feel, we want to lash out at people. We strongly desire to respond to evil with evil, insult with insult. It's not in our nature to seek peace when others are pursuing war against us, and we just want to get back in their face and show them who's right, don't we? Because of our nature and because of our tendencies, Peter encourages us to be extra careful, to come back at people with courtesy and with respect. And yes, respect even for those who are causing your suffering. So that's the context and the implications of these two admonitions. One, to make Christ holy in your hearts as Lord, and the second admonition, to be ready to give an answer for the hope within you. God, through the pen of Peter, warns us to avoid our natural tendencies during times of suffering, and to be especially careful during those times to make Christ holy in our hearts and to give an answer with courtesy and respect. And on that note, I'll leave you with a few final words from 1 Peter. Peter writes, "Since Christ suffered in the flesh, you also arm yourselves with the same attitude. Dear friends, do not be astonished that a trial by fire is occurring among you, but rejoice in the degree that you have shared in the sufferings of Christ. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory rests on you. If you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but glorify God that you bear such a name. So then, let us who suffer according to the will of God entrust their souls to a faithful Creator as they do good." Well, I'm so grateful that God led you to this daily devotional, making Christ holy in your hearts, and that you took the time to listen and to watch. I hope you were edified by it and that you come back often and check out our other content. Take a look also at our website at walkgodsway.com, where we are continually uploading Bible study and teaching resources like our study guides, our teacher's guides, and PowerPoint presentations that help you enhance your own study and your own teaching of the Scriptures. And once again, thank you, and may God bless you as you endeavor to walk God's way.